house. You're on the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. We'd love for you to join us right here at thebibleforum.net. We're talking about Israel here, the Temple Mount, end times scenarios, things of that nature. But what is really going on, because Israel is just coming out of their Passover season here in 2016. And there has been a tremendous impact made upon the Temple Mount area by Jews, countered by Muslims. The police wear bulletproof vests. They carry stun grenades and tear gas when they patrol the Temple Mount. They don't want to kill anybody up there. What are they afraid of? Well, since the days of the Six-Day War, 1967, Israel has been the watchdog on the Temple Mount. They liberated it, first time in 2,000 years. And their goal now is to make sure that Muslims can worship in peace. And they're there to make sure that Israelis don't. The official Israeli government stance has been the same since 1967. But today, Israeli public perception of the ban on Jewish prayer has shifted. There's now a concerted public relations campaign using the updated jargon, calling for freedom of religion and human rights. And all of that has weakened this standoff, this thing that has been for the last 30, 40 years. The movement to give both sides equal access has today garnered support from a who's who of religious leaders, current ministers of the Knesset, and even cabinet minister Uri Ariel, who has called for the building of the third temple on the Temple Mount. In this Passover holiday period, as some 850 Jews ascend the Temple Mount during the week, the numbers of Jewish activists intentionally breaking status quo ordinances also grew. And all eyes are on them as they perform what are considered furtive marriage ceremonies, other forms of worship, whether it be just a quick prayer or whatever, attempts to conduct animal sacrifices, and film themselves mumbling prayers and getting arrested as a result. These things are now being broadcast all over social media. Gradually puts pressure on the entire system. Almost every day this week, the intermediate days of Passover, police have ejected several Jews from the Mount for breaking restrictions during their visits. The Temple Mount is sacred to Jews. It is steeped in myth and folklore, as well as biblical reality. One such event demonstrates how all of this works out. It's at the height of the Six-Day War in 1967. A 28-year-old rabbi by the name of Yisrael Ariel is serving as a reservist in a paratrooper unit that is deployed to Jerusalem's Old City. This unit led the Israeli advance to the Western Wall and to the Temple Mount. And he was swept up with messianic fervor. For some of us who witnessed this occurring, watching it, listening to it, when the Jews got to the Wailing Wall, they wailed. It broke them. They were overcome physically, emotionally, spiritually, with the presence of that wall. That wall that stood holding up the level area where the temple once stood. It is still a precious, precious place for Jews. But while this paratrooper unit was taking this place, this Temple Mount, Ariel was swept up in this messianic fervor. Later he told that upon hearing that they were hearing two soldiers talking about the fact that they had met two old men on their way up to the mount, Ariel immediately took them for the prophet Elijah and the Messiah himself. Do you think Christians would do a thing like that? Jews are doing that. Who else, he said, would appear here during the battle for the Temple Mount after 2,000 years? Well, the two old men turned out to be his teachers. His teachers at the bastion of religious Zionism, two prominent rabbis. Yet while they embraced at the Western Wall, he said he and many others felt the Messiah was indeed on his way, as he said it would just take another hour or two, because these are the days of the Messiah. But the Messiah didn't appear that night, nor any other. The American-born Richmond, who has worked at the Institute since 1987, explained that the central importance of the temple to Judaism is obvious in that of the 613 commandments required of religious Jews, fully 1/3 deal with the temple. Indeed, the amount of ink devoted to the temple in the Hebrew Bible is completely disproportionate to any other subject. People assume that building the temple is unnatural, that it can't be done, that it's something only the Messiah can do. He has to reinstate it. He has to bring it. He says, this is the excruciating frustration in my work, that I have to struggle with that notion that somehow this temple is going to come down from heaven. The whole goal of the Temple Institute, he said, is to be as actively engaged as possible within the reality of the current political climate. He disavows any political implication in the organization's work, and they're working to create the temple's vessels and other research, do other research and other implements and so forth. And he calls that the first stage. We've talked about this in the past. They've got the garments, the priest's garments. They've got a list of people they know or descendants from. They're looking for more. They are building other implements of worship. Just last year, at this time, a group built an altar using the Bible's instruction as to how it should be done and look. And then they were offered sacrifice on it and so forth, not on the Temple Mount, someplace else. But while this is all the first stage, he says that it still, in the minds of some, is the antithesis of Jewish thought. Everything about the life of a Jew, he says, is about action, about doing. And without a temple, there isn't any way to do it. There are hundreds of expressions in the Bible that have to do with action. Israel lived under law. Law prescribes how you do. The Christian does not live under law. For us, it's not about doing. It's about being. Of course, if you are, you will do. And for some, that's such a subtle difference they can't get it. They still think, well, we still have to do the old. No. There's no requirement to do. There's a requirement to be holy, as God is holy. And if the God of the universe dwells in your heart, the Bible says he's in there both to will and to do, according to his good purpose, whatever that may be. He's there to give you the desire, and once you have the desire, he will give you the power. For the Jew, everything that goes on in the temple is psychodrama. It's jarring, it's jolting, it's visceral, it's violent. You ever kill a sheep? Animal sacrifices are a strong psychological experience that make men think deeply about life and about the sanctity of life. Everything is about bringing man to a higher level of consciousness. Everything in the temple is level upon level of meaning, rich. For those involved, it's a labor of faith and of love to discover anything from the stones that adorn the high priest's breastplate to the fact that the gland of a particular snail can be used for both the blue and purple tints in the high priest's vestments, depending on the amount of exposure the animal has to sunlight. But can the average Israeli school group fathom the controversy and the preparation of the future temple's vessels? Does the random passerby understand the significance behind the Institute's $3 million gold menorah? A menorah is the lights, the 7 lights you see it kind of swooped out. $3 million for a lampstand. One that now occupies prime real estate in the old city, visible to all who descend the well-worn stairwell to the western wall. Such is the fervor, the imminence that surrounds Messiah's coming for the Jew. The Jew looks for his return. Israel is still waiting for his appearance. They don't believe he's ever been here. We're looking for the return. They're looking for his first coming. Will they ever see him? Oh, yeah. The Bible says his feet will touch down on the Mount of Olives. That's that mountain just across the valley from the temple wall. The Bible says that mountain will immediately break in half. The Bible says that Jesus will enter the temple area. He will come through that eastern gate that a German general had walled up, I think during the First World War, when Germany had domination over Jerusalem, so that Messiah could not come through there. What do you think? Think those bricks will stop him? It will come after almost 7 years of intense battle and cataclysm, starvation, disease, death, and demonic activity. It will come only when 1/3 of the Jews on this earth are still alive. It'll come when those Jews rush to Israel from nations all across the globe in anticipation, as they are doing now. And this Messiah, Jesus by name, will put down the war that is raging. Every unbeliever on earth, when Jesus arrives, will die immediately. Satan and his minions will be banished from the earth, locked in a pit where they will stay for the next 1,000 years. It'll be the first time in human history that Satan does not rule this earth. And King Jesus will reign from Jerusalem for 1,000 years, a righteous king, a righteous reign. The nations of the earth will worship him. They will send representatives to Jerusalem every year to pay homage. And should one nation or another decide they don't need to do that this year, the Bible says that nation's crops will suffer the next year. It is a righteous rule, but it is a very legalistic form of righteousness. Only true believers will inhabit the earth at the beginning, but these will have children. And those children will have children, and those children will have children. And all of them will know their grandparents and their great-grandparents and their great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, because nobody's dying. Will they all be believers? No. How can you say that? Well, the Bible says that after 1,000 years, Satan will be released. He'll be able to raise a great army to come against the King of Kings. Of course, it's a fool's errand. The Bible says one word shall fell them all. And this corrupted earth will explode, disappear. In its place, God will create a new one, a new heaven and a new earth. When Christians speak of heaven, it is that new heaven and that new earth they're talking about. Initially, it is this earth, cleaned up, fixed up, working a lot better. But ultimately, it's something brand new. It's not a bunch of clouds and you lying around strumming on your harp. It's physical land and sea and sky, a new earth, with Jesus at the center of it all, forever and ever. What will it be like? It will probably be like the first one, with its axis perfectly lined up with the sun, with an atmosphere that is idyllic, where there's no sickness, no death, no disease, and no sin. And we will live there in harmony, learning from the feet of Jesus and growing in grace throughout all of eternity.